Thank you, Norm. J'aimerais souligner deux nouvelles d'importance aujourd'hui, deux événements d'importance au-delà de cette conférence. La canonisation du frère André et la conférence de presse de Tiger Woods. Don't miss that. Chers représentants et artisans de l'industrie audiovisuelle canadienne, chers amis, bon petit déjeuner et bonjour. Quand les responsables de Prime Time m'ont invité à venir vous parler au petit déjeuner, ils ne se doutaient pas qu'il y avait quelque chose de subliminal dans leur invitation. Tous les médecins s'accordent à dire que le petit déjeuner devrait être notre plus important repas de la journée. Ils ont même inventé un dicton pour nous le rappeler. Nous devrions déjeuner comme un roi ou avec un roi, dîner comme un prince et souper comme un pauvre, comme Telefilm. But don't worry, I don't intend to give a long speech on the petit déjeuner comme un roi ou avec un roi. However, I would like to say that I'm honored and privileged to be starting your day. As we all saw on TV as the clock ticked over the new year, 2010 provides a good vantage point for taking stock of the first decade of the new millennium. This is particularly true for Telefilm, which is responsible for implementing the Canadian feature film policy that was formulated 10 years ago. In addition, Telefilm is currently preparing a new 5-year corporate plan, is about to take on administration of the new Canada Media Fund programs, and will welcome a new executive director within the next few weeks. So as you can see, 2010 is truly a pivotal year for us. This morning, I'd like to talk to you about certain key aspects of the assessment of our activities from 2000 to 2010 by reviewing and evaluating some of the objectives in our current corporate plan. The first objective is our strategic plan. In our strategic plan was quantitative in nature. 10 years ago, the Canadian feature film policy, which created the Canada Feature Film Fund, targeted a Canadian market share of 5%, expressed in terms of box office receipts. The second objective was to develop the industry's potential by increasing the proportion of private and foreign investment. The third objective, which concerns governance of Telefilm, focuses on making it an effective, transparent, and responsible administrator, committed to serving its clients better. You will understand my hesitation as chair of the board to comment on this last objective. I leave that task to the minister responsible for Telefilm and to you all, our clients. However, I can tell you that today, the agency whose mandate it is to foster and promote the development of the Canadian audiovisual industry is well governed. With a simplified structure, a skilled and devoted board of directors, and obvious enthusiasm among the employees who work there. In fact, I'll take this opportunity to acknowledge the people from Telefilm who are with us this morning. So let's look at our first two objectives, starting with the one of obtaining a market share for Canadian movies of at least 5% of box office receipts. What you're seeing on the screen right now are the changes in these markets shares from 2001 to 2009. Speaking strictly from a managerial point of view, while we've made some real progress since 2001, we didn't reach the set objective. We didn't hit the bullseye, in other words. Clearly, no one likes to admit failure, even a partial one, but we have to look reality in the face. And for me, it's a question of transparency. We have to acknowledge this reality. We ended 2009 with a total market share of 3.3%. That was better than 2008, but still far from the 5% objective. As you can see, The curve barely moved from the period from 2001 to 2009, except in 2005 when we popped the cork on the champagne, but the party didn't last very long. When we separate out linguistic markets, we notice a contrast. English language feature films finished 2009 with a 0.8% share of the English language market. French language feature films, on the other hand, wrapped up the year with 18.5% market share of all French language movies, an increase of 5% over 2008, and had an average of 17.1% for the decade. Overall, French language feature films represent more than 66% of the total Canadian market share of Canadian films. It is not easy to really make sense of these data either, because due to the low percentages, they are extremely volatile. For example, when a movie such as Avatar arrives in theaters, it pushes the performance of all other movies down by a number of points. The release in late 2009 of this movie by James Cameron, a Canadian by the way, may have kept us from achieving our target of 5% last year. Also, we should keep in mind that revenues from the 0.8% share of the English language market represent only 8% of total revenues for Canadian English language feature films. For the producers and distributors of these films, international sales represent 65% of their revenues. And if you add television, it goes up to 80% of their revenues. But in general terms, the Canadian movie industry suffers in comparison to other cultural sectors. For example, in 2008, Canadian music artists captured 21% of market share in Canada. The last official data, which dates back to 1997, shows that Canadian publishers occupied 45% of the market. While we know that figure has declined somewhat, it is likely still between 30 and 40% on a yearly basis. These are somewhat painful observations, but they must be made. The idea is not to point fingers or find who's at fault. It's not to pity ourselves for being the neighbor of a global cultural empire. It is simply to observe, objectively, calmly, and matter-of-factly, that the status quo in the way we do things is no longer viable. Now, normally when everyone agrees that the status quo is no longer viable, the stage should be set for a change. In fact, the choice is simple: change or stagnate. I don't have to tell you which option I favor. And so, as a new corporate plan is about to see the light of day, it's time to step up and be daring. We must dare to change how we do things. We must dare to change certain rules of the game that govern the funding of feature films so that the quest for audiences, especially on the English language side, gives more encouraging results. A nation's movie industry is important for both its collective memory and its underlying values. In fact, a nation's cinema is too important to leave it develop on the sidelines.